Welcome, welcome, welcome. Part of our continuing series where we talk to reporters, writers, military officials, people from America who are intelligent and can speak well about the subjects of what's going on right now. We're trying to find out about political division in America, what causes it, where it goes, and we wanted to bring more unedited, unaltered, insightful opinions directly to you so that you could do this thing that was popular back when I was in high school called thinking for yourself. Maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't. With us today, it's Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski. She's been retired Air Force official. She has also been very politically active. I believe she's appeared on C-SPAN, numerous other programs over the years, advocating, being involved in politics. Last couple of years where I found her was on the Judge Napolitano show. She's had a lot of insightful commentary on different foreign policy adventures from America. Let's say the Israeli interaction. That's all I'll say. Don't want to get into the controversy today on that. Ukraine and a couple other things. And she was providing different and unique commentary from what the mainstream media was saying. And it turned out that her and many of the other experts on Napolitano were 100% right when the media called it 100% wrong on what multiple foreign conflicts and how they were going to play out. So that's when I started paying attention. I really got into Judge Knapp with the Ukraine war because you and a few others were saying it's B, and the media was all saying, no, it's A. And it took about a year or two to play out, and then it turned out to be what you guys were saying and not what they were saying. And I've told everybody, hey, go to Judge Knapp. It's hard to tell who's telling the truth, but when some people say the opposite of what the mainstream news is saying, and they're 100% correct, proven a year and a half later, after critiques and a lot of insults, I imagine, of you're not saying what the rest of everybody else is saying, so you got to be having it wrong. She did a great job on that, and that's where I found her specifically on an episode about unraveling and secession. Colonel, did I say anything wrong? Do I need to correct anything that I said?
Nope, that's true. I have been retired for a little over, I guess, over 20 years now, and but paying close attention to all the same things. And it's like you said, we are making some of the same mistakes over and over. Judge Knapp has a great lineup of people. I've learned a lot from his other guests. Colonel McGregor is one of the totally understands certainly conflict anywhere, but he's been all over the Ukraine thing, and 100% right. And we were hoping, I think a lot of people were hoping that McGregor might be picked up as somebody to advise Trump, because Trump clearly needs a little extra foreign policy advice. He didn't get McGregor so far, but anyway, McGregor's right a lot.
McGregor's right a lot. Scott Ritter's right a lot. Larry Johnson, Mad Irishman, who always is inspired by his Irish grandmother, Ray McGovern.
Yes.
I watched Ray McGovern a decade ago. And then when I saw him pop up on Judge Knapp, I'm like, oh my God, that's an actual resistance figure. Like that guy has a reputation. What's he doing on Judge Knapp? Something weird is going on here. And then I met the other guys like Scott Ritter and you and other people, and they're going, I don't care what the mainstream media says. I don't care what your other experts are saying. This is what's going on. And I think the American people have a right to know. And in our small bubble in the microverse, we're at least going to get the truth out to whatever degree we can, because that's what should be happening. And we're all patriots, and we recognize the mainstream media is not doing that. Don't agree with everything everyone says there, of course. But boy, a lot of people got it right way early on the Israeli thing in Gaza, and on Ukraine, and on the collapse of the supposed predicted collapse of the Russian economy, which never happened. They actually grew and thrived. And they also got it right on the inability of Russia to do domestic production of military supplies. We were told, they were running out, they had to beg people. And then it turns out that's completely not true. They're having an economic boom because they can produce more than they actually need, whereas America can't make a third of the artillery rounds that we're trying to ship to Ukraine, even though we're 10 to 20 times the size of Russia, which just, as I told people, once you lose that industrial base, that's how we won World War II. It's gone. So guess who has it now? China.
Yeah. And the sad thing is, if we're a big country, we have a massive military, cost trillions of dollars, but it's not effective, and we know
Right.
this, and it can't do these things. Yeah. So, but the problem is, and I can see where Americans, we're proud of our country. Nobody wants to sit around and bash the military because it can't do its job. We don't want to pick on the F-35 because it doesn't. It's a big waste. But if we don't do that, if our politicians in our Congress doesn't do that, if we don't pay attention to the truth, then we can't solve the problem because we don't know there's a problem. We are living in a fantasy world. And this idea that, in fact, one of the most interesting things about looking at Russia's progress and its economic evolution, its leadership, many of the things that, as you watch Russia conduct their special military operation, which hopefully is this whole thing will be over soon. But as you watch how they have adapted to drone warfare, which is a new thing for everybody, if you watch how their economy shifted and how they fired a few people, Putin fired some people. He fired them for cause. He said, you're not doing this right. Well, we watched how he managed his country. We watched how they defined strategy, how they communicated, looking at Lavrov, their foreign minister.
Oh, yeah.
And meanwhile, we've got a guy, Blinken, and nothing out of Blinken's mouth was true, but it also wasn't very diplomatic, and he didn't seem very knowledgeable, and he repeated a lot of the same catchphrases over and over. That Biden wanted him to say, I'm sure, but if you've ever listened to Lavrov, and I know the judge sometimes will have a little bit of a speech from the Russian foreign minister. He's quite knowledgeable. He's quite articulate. In fact, he can lecture us in English. He's quite fluent. But the things that he says are based in provable fact many times. And so you go, wow, you mean a diplomat can actually reference provable fact? They can acknowledge strengths and weaknesses. He can do that. Ours can't. So we learn a lot by watching countries doing what we used to do. And that's a scary feeling because we're Americans. We're supposed to be number one. And yet the things we used to be known for, many countries around the world are beating us at our own game. And meanwhile, we're going, oh, don't watch that. Don't listen to that. You can only listen to this because that's all disinformation. You Americans need to straighten up, and listen to the government. Why? We're learning that that's not a good place to go for our best and last information. It's not at all. So we're learning those things, and the judge has a great role. But really, as we're finding out with the USAID and all the media people that paid, we don't need any of those people to do news because the nature of our global technology today is just like this. People can talk and share, and they can take questions in real time from anywhere. And that makes people accountable. If you start saying things and your facts aren't right, somebody's going to say, wait a minute, your facts aren't right. Why don't we talk about this? And then the person can acknowledge a mistake. You know what? It's not a sin to say you made a mistake, but you wouldn't know that by watching the American government.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. It's not a sin, but you wouldn't know that today. Almost no one can do it. You're totally right. Sergei Lavrov, I think, is one of the best diplomats of our time. I think if you go into a century into the future and you look back at this period, they're going to look at him as one of the most pivotal players of whether you liked his politics or not. He really understands the international landscape and he's able to play it for Russia's benefit. And throughout history, you'll see these people occasionally pop up where they're just beyond everybody else in all the surrounding countries when it comes to chess, when everybody else is playing checkers. Mm-hmm. He's the von Clausewitz of this century, if I may, as far as understanding how to play the game. Yeah. Let me ask you some of the general questions before we get into the meat and potatoes, if I may. This is what I ask everybody. Is political division in America bad, or is it just fine and there's nothing to worry about? And we've had tough times before. And come on, guys, we got through the 60s. We got through the Civil War. It'll be just fine. These people are making it into a big something because they want to complain about something and we don't need to worry. Or are we facing levels of breakdown and distrust that are historically high and do rightfully cause a feeling of panic? Which one? And please answer as both someone who's educated in the military who's familiar with American policy, but also as just someone who's living in this bubble of America with the rest of us. What do
Yeah.
you think is going on?
Well, there's definitely division, and I think there's what I think is causing a lot of it is a waking up. And the waking up is not like, oh, I had a great night's sleep and I'm waking up. It's going to be a great day. It's not that kind of waking up. I'm seeing even at the local area, local level, rural America, which, you look at those red blue maps and you go, oh, well, it's mostly red. And then you have your urban blue
Mhm.
areas. Okay, well, so that's political division or whatever. It's economic division. It's tax-based division. It's all kinds of things. But in reality, all of that red is also divided. And people are stressed to the max. In fact, this is what brought Trump to the fore. This is what got him elected. He is speaking to a whole bunch of people who live really what we used to would call hard scrabble lives. But, we're in the modern world, so we have a hard scrabble life, but everybody's got a smartphone. So go, well, we're good. But people have to work longer, far longer, on multiple jobs to get things that we always hear about it. In the 70s, one guy could go to work, his wife could stay home, raise 2 or 3 kids,
Mhm.
car in a driveway. Their home cost them, $3,000, and it was a nice house. It was made of brick. So we do not live in that world anymore.
No.
A big part of it, of course, is the destruction of our money, the Fed going off the gold standard, and unrestrained borrowing and issuing of currency by our government. This is a big problem. And that problem has gutted the middle class and has made all of us poorer. We say like, oh, the rich are getting richer. Well, actually, anybody who uses the dollar is getting poorer, even if they were rich to begin with. Okay.
Hmm.
That money is not, it is a degraded currency. And
Yes.
the world uses it. The world uses it because of really the leftover effect, the fact that we used it for so long. You a lot of times you keep doing things like a marriage that doesn't end when it probably should have. I hate to say this. Obviously, we don't want any marriages to end, but a lot of times when people do finally get divorced, they look back at it after the pain is kind of healing a little bit, and they go, "Why did I do this 10 years too late?" There was this. But you hang in there, you see, and I think the world, who is used to the dollar, has hung in there with the dollar, and of course, global banking doesn't help it. Global Federal Reserves, that link together their interest rate policies and things like that. All of it helps bind people to the dollar, but it is a degraded, very degraded currency. And for Americans, that's our currency. We don't have a lot we're not going to use the peso or Canadian dollars. That's not happening. This is our currency. We have to use it. We want to. We're proud to use the dollar. But the problem is it's impoverishing all of us. And as people become strained and overworked and underappreciated, taxes have increased, of course. There's no doubt. Costs of everything have increased. So we are more and more pressured to produce for the state. Okay, now we're not communists. We don't produce for the state, but really, we feel like we do. And some of the stuff that Elon Musk is sharing with
Yeah,
what
please, please.
waste. I mean, people are reacting to that in a very personal way. It's not that they go, oh, I knew the government was wasting money. It's so interesting that they were wasting it on this, that, and the other. That's not people's reaction. The average American, the red country, flyover country people, they see this and they are personally insulted because they sacrificed to pay their taxes. They believe they had to. Of course, they did have to. You will go to jail and be fined horrendously and lose all your property if you don't pay your taxes. Everybody knows that. They know that. So they were compelled to pay their taxes, but they did it as Americans. And they found out the state didn't care one bit, did not value it the way they valued it. So now we see, well, there's polarization between people who believe the state values them and people who know that the state does not value them. And that's one of the big divisions that we're seeing, and that is not political. It's a economic. It's a class division, and it's very dangerous because revolutions don't happen because one political party decides, well, I'm taking over. Like on January 6th. Yeah, we'll send a bunch of unarmed guys and they're going to stop that count or whatever they were going to do. And they're going to make a different government. Really? Really? That is insane. That's not how revolutions happen. That's not how coups happen. But what does cause them to happen is when when there's class divisions that cannot be crossed. They can't be brought together. And this is what we're seeing in our country. And to some extent, Trump has forestalled something really bad happening, although many bad things can happen as a result of the Trump presidency. There's no doubt about that. But one of the things that he did was he gave voice to a very large class in this country that is just about ready to throw the towel in.
Yeah.
But they're not throwing the towel in because now they have Trump. And Trump is going to listen to them, right? Trump, I mean, all those tours across the country, that was an amazing populist demagoguery, whatever your critics want to call it. But he was listening when no one else was listening to these people. And he was validating their concerns. They give him a lot of credit. I mean, you have to give Trump an amazing amount of credit for everything. He's a very interesting, fascinating specimen. But he made more off his McDonald's drive-through job and driving that dump truck at the end, the garbage.
Yeah.
He that really clinched, I think, in many ways, what he was doing, which is to represent a whole working class in this country that has been alienated. They've been alienated and abused. And whether that alienation was done on purpose or by accident or because, the powers that be don't care about them, whatever it was, they were alienated and he got them back. He got them out to cast a vote, which is, I mean, I'm all for voting, right? Vote, sure.
Right.
But that's not how change happens. That's not how revolutions happen.
The election system won't bring meaningful change, Colonel?
No, I'm with the anarchist and the communist who said, she goes, who was it? The famous, she goes, if voting mattered, it would be illegal if it changed anything.
Oh, I've heard that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't think it makes a lot of difference. And also I've participated in enough and observed enough local elections that some of the same problems that you see at the national elections, these same corruption, the same games playing and the way people respond, how fear is used. You see this in local elections. I mean, this is how they keep the bad guy off the town council.
I mean, how many times have we seen Russia, 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 Russia? Don't look at this. Don't look at that. It could possibly be Russian. I think it was Hunter Biden's laptop. And they said it's probably Russian disinformation. Turned out to be a complete lie. Everybody stood away from that. So it seems you just sprinkle a little bit of that Red Scare fear over and people go through it. I thought we were more evolved from the Red Scare era of the 1930s. It appears not, or the McCarthy era of the 1950s. I remember being taught as a boy that can never happen. We won't be that irrational again in the future. And I feel like I'm watching the McCarthy hearings all over again. Just never thought I'd be here. Never thought I was told as a boy this was a thing in the past and it was a mistake and we learned from that and now we know better. And then as an older man, I'm 47 now, I'm seeing us go right back into it. And I'm like, well, I guess we didn't learn anything at all.
All people everywhere really when we're busy, we're focused on our own lives and government wants something from us. It's easiest to terrorize us, to frighten us. And then, what do they call that thing where you make the solution and then you you make the problem and then offer the solution.
Yes. Yeah. Hegelian dialectic or something like that, or Overton window or something.
Sure. And the government's very good at that. And all governments are. I don't care if they're led by a dictator. Dictators are extremely good at this, but so are Democrats. I mean, small
Hitler was elected. So
yes, absolutely.
Just putting that in there. Also, if you go by elections, Putin won his elections, so did Xi Jinping. There's a study by Northridge University, which was backed up by Harvard, came out around 2014. And it said, going back to the late 1970s, they had looked at all the bills that the public wanted, and then all the bills that the top 1% corporations wanted. And they found out that what the public wanted had I believe the quote was almost an infinitesimal impact on what bills were actually passed. It was a longitudinal study going from the late 1970s up to 2010. And they were saying basically since the 1970s, whatever the public wants has absolutely nothing to do with what gets voted into law. No academic challenged this. Harvard backed it up. You heard about it in 2014, and then they stopped talking about it. And it was
Yeah,
basically
oligarch.
proved that for the
We're
last 2 decades.
we're an oligarchy, and they showed they did exactly that. They looked at who got what they wanted out of government consistently, and under all these various circumstances. And of course, it was not the people. The people were never got what they wanted, and that includes what they voted for. So this
Right.
idea, and that's why I think we, especially with every 4-year presidential elections, of course, we've been going these mad cycles for years. Giving very little choice. I mean, Trump is only surprising because we have elected the exact same person for the last 25 years. And now we got somebody who's a tiny bit different than those other people.
Colonel, you're saying there's no real choice in American elections going back about 2 decades? There's effectively a uniparty? Is that what you're saying?
We keep electing the same guy and or gal. I don't know. I guess we haven't had a female president yet, but they were all, we've been offered up the same things. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. A big Nikki Haley fan then, I take it. Or Hillary Clinton fan?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Aren't we
What's the
supposed to
difference?
women as the first
Yeah.
woman president?
I mean, honestly, and they make fun about Trump with this years ago because, Trump for many years, I mean, his whole life was a Democrat. He was a New York Democrat businessman. And he was very much friends with the Clintons. And at one point, I think Hillary was the senator from, his hometown in New York. And so, it's just, we're presented with a story, but if it doesn't take much to see the real truth behind that,
it's,
and people are seeing it. And part of it is because we do, it's because of the technology, it's podcasts and visual, the idea of, I remember when I first found out about TikTok, I'm like, who is going to scroll through a bunch of videos that people are making in their kitchens? It's like, oh my God, that is so stupid. What a dumb idea I thought that was. And yet people will do that because we are visually oriented. It's very easy for us to take in information through our eyes, sit passively. And again, TV generations, multiple generations of kids watching screens. I mean, this is who we are. But one of the good things is if the technology is going to provide us actual information or imagery, and I think this is another thing certainly that has impacted how the Gaza disaster.
I've heard that.
No, Gaza isn't a disaster. It's a genocide. It's a disaster. It's terrible. Yeah. But, the thing is, it's not a victory for Israel. And that's something that was not expected because, common knowledge would say, if you have a big military backed up by an even bigger military with unlimited resources, and you just bomb a bunch of mostly unarmed people in a 26-mile length of beach, wow, who's going to win? Who's going to win that one? Well, let's say probably Israel is going to win that one, right? But Israel has not won that one. And inside of Israel, something we don't, Americans don't see what goes on in how the Israelis talk about their own situation. They actually have far more press freedom inside of Israel than we do in this country.
I've heard that with Haaretz actually publishing things you won't see published in mainstream American news.
Yeah. And they
incredible.
I'm sure they get government money to help subsidize their media, but they will ask.
Haaretz said stuff that they won't print here.
That's right.
Third largest newspaper, and they'll print it, and you don't see it here. So whatever that means.
That's right. So in Israel, of course, they have a ceasefire, and hopefully it'll last. We don't know, but
hopefully
it ceasefired, and they have blown up the Netzarim corridor that they built. They burnt it all down, and hundreds of thousands of Gazans and their men, women, and children hiked forward to the north, and they're there. And as they have phones, they are taking pictures. Of course, Israel targeted, I don't know, it was like 500, 400 media personnel, reporters, photographers, people associated with media companies in Gaza. They were specifically targeted and killed and slaughtered. Okay, so we said, we'll kill the photographer. Well, unfortunately for Israel, how many photographers are there? Well, everybody with a cell phone is a reporter. And so those images are very compelling and very upsetting to Israel, who says, you told us we were winning this war. You told us justice would happen. And all I see is, and again, the Israelis don't like the Gazans. I mean, you can see pictures of them trying to, tear up Gazan aid. They don't want the Gazans to live. They see them as subhuman. And that's unfortunate. And thank God America is not like that. But Israel is like that. But at the same time, they, like Americans, understand that their government is lying to them because it's saying one thing and they're looking on the screen and they're saying, well, that's not what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing is well-dressed, spiffy, well-armed Hamas and literally 1.8 million Gazans standing on 2 feet, not dead.
Yeah.
You told me we won. We did not win. So they also, and this is a crisis between people and their government. Israel is going through their own, mostly of their own making. But it's happening in Europe with people in their governments, and it's definitely happening in the United States. And no one in this country is really talking about that crisis of trust. To some extent, Trump is doing that, but it's far deeper and far broader than what Trump is really addressing.
Well, they can't, right? So the lack of trust with the media and with the federal government and all federal institutions, I think except for the military, according to Pew polling, is the lowest it's been in 4 decades. I've been trying to raise awareness of that. Like, that's not stability. And it doesn't show like, oh, we're just having a bad day. No, after a 4-decade trend, it's kind of showing which way that it is. The lack of trust is because the American public believes that the media and the federal government lied to them. So the only way to acknowledge the lack of trust is to say, we caused it and we did this and it's all our fault. Still keep believing and watching us. They can't. That's what's called political suicide. I admit that I'm the liar and the demon, and then you're supposed to still play allegiance to me.
And this was impacted. This was started or accelerated by COVID. The government
it was had
a great opportunity to try to solve a problem and be honest, but it couldn't be honest because it was implicated in COVID, which we now know 4 years later. But at the time, if you said, looks like maybe an American-funded lab in Wuhan, why do we? And first off, everybody's going, what do you mean an American-funded lab in Wuhan?
Yeah, I
had no idea this was happening. But the government could not admit that because it protects itself above all. And but then later the truth came out, and of course everything else that it did was proven to be pretty stupid and harmful. And people were berated, and families were divided. And actually, speaking of your division, I think everybody in this country has relatives that, for some period of time, and maybe even to this date, don't speak to each other anymore over disagreements about, is the shot a healthy shot or is the shot
I saw
not
that.
a healthy shot?
I saw that. But I heard from people that the division was going. It started with Trump. COVID came in during his first term. But I had heard about people saying, maybe we don't celebrate Thanksgiving together because you voted for him and I didn't.
Oh, yeah. Sure, Trump.
Right before that. So I think you had a
combination of.
Yeah, they threw gasoline. There was a fire, and then they go, let's dump a gallon of gasoline on that and see what happens.
That's a government solution.
But there's also going back to the George H.W. Bush era, where the media, FBI, CIA, Colin Powell, and everybody basically lied to all of America and the international world and violated international law. And I mean, that was just a straight up lie. They just wanted to go in for the oil, and they told everybody something else to the American people. And they got multiple federal institutions to basically go along or not say anything. Nobody was punished. Nobody really apologized.
Whistleblowers were punished.
Whistleblowers were punished. And then you have, I don't know, 30 to 50,000 young men and boys and girls without limbs now. Maybe 10,000 dead. Nobody was punished. Nothing happened. My favorite was when George H.W. Bush went on a video in front of 100 Americans and said, when a foreign country invades another smaller country, that's wrong and evil. You can't do that in Iraq. Ukraine.
Yeah.
And everybody laughed.
Oh yeah.
We got 1 million brown-skinned people dead for nothing.
Isn't that funny? Yep.
God damn,
Yep.
that's funny.
Yeah. I'll
And
tell
I
you.
show that to people and I go, this makes you feel proud to be an American? We laugh about our adventure while criticizing Russia for theirs, when the death toll, I think, in Ukraine is somewhere around, for civilians, it's tied at maybe 50 to 60,000, and with America, we're looking at 1 million. I mean, that's what Amnesty International said. It's just not even comparable. You'll never see that in the news, and yet they are the largest evil. But we're not. When we got 20 times the number of innocent civilians killed, and that's a matter of record. I
No,
just find it interesting.
it's true, and this is really a long story too, because it goes back even to Vietnam.
Yeah.
You ask any American kid, because it'll be in their little history books if they read them. How many did we lose? How many people died in Vietnam? And they'll say 58,000. They're talking about the Americans. How many Vietnamese and Laotians and whatever died? It's over 3 million people, and we don't even know because we don't care, because we defoliated and burned it up, and we didn't count the bodies, very much like we see in Gaza. But of course, that was long before cell phones, and we didn't have a lot of, we really relied on reporters to break through, and whistleblowers like Ellsworth, to really Ellsberg, to really provide something years and years ago. I mean, in the 70s. So we see it again and again and again, and we are getting a little better each time, a little better. We're not completely vulnerable to 100% McCarthyism or whatever, because the technology is allowing us to kind of keep things in our memory better. Because if we forgot something, we can go look at the picture. We can see a speech on our phone, in a second. We can find, oh, wait a minute, I thought what did he say 20 years ago? And boom, I can find out what he said 20 years ago, because I'm looking at it, I'm listening to it. And it reminds us, it helps us realize, because we live in a moment, we live in the present. But if that's part of our present, if our history then becomes part of our present, then we're empowered by that. We haven't forgotten our history, because it's right here. It's on my phone. I'm looking at it. There's what he said. And people are doing that. People are finding, I mean, Ron Paul's a great example, right? Ron Paul has been saying interesting and important things for 45 years. And people will find that Ron Paul speech when he was a young congressman, and they'll play it. Or they'll find that time in 2003 when he stood alone in the Congress and explained why these lies. And they go, what do you mean? People knew it was lies? Well, Ron Paul did. And guess what? I can watch him. So we have an advantage, and it speeds up the pace of things, and which is why governments need to surveil us constantly. Well, why do they need to? Because we're moving fast. We are moving so fast. Society is not, we're not serfs anymore, that we have to wait till the harvest season. First we plant, and then all summer we weed, and then we gather. And we're a slave to the nature cycle in the 1500s. No, we're not slave to any cycle. It is instantaneous now. If an idea catches, if a truth is told and it lights on fire, we can all know it immediately. And that is what creates revolutions. That is what breaks governments. It collapses governments. It's funny. We talk about Syria, what we saw in Syria only a few months ago. Assad, we have been starving and sanctioning and fighting and depriving Assad of oil, for years.
Collapsing their economy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this has been a long-term CIA and deep state plan.
Yeah.
And we were doing that quietly, and people didn't really know.
Well, Biden came out and celebrated it after it was done.
Well, sure.
We're happy.
But the world had seen Assad stay and not be moved for so long that suddenly, when his army melted away, and less than 30,000 terrorists, because they're not terrorists anymore. Now they're diplomats, but before they were terrorists. Yeah. But 30,000 people basically toppled the government of Syria and instituted a new government overnight. Okay. That's the speed at which change can happen to a corrupt state. And it's a fast pace. And I think this is why they surveil us, because, the FBI needs to know who's fomenting problems, because it can be very rapid, especially when you have these existing fissures in our society and you have a whole bunch of people that not only don't trust the government, but feel that the government has done them wrong. This is how we got our revolution in 1776. We had a declaration, and what did the declaration say?
Right. Yeah.
It said, "You, the king, have done some things. Oh, by the way, let me list them. The things that you have done to us. We don't like it because we're Englishmen. We're equal to you."
Well, now we violate those same things. So
Well,
the
sure we
Freedom
do.
Act, the Patriot Act, it sounds like you're saying those were not designed to protect us from Al Qaeda and later ISIS, but more designed for the government to be able to surveil us, to maintain domestic control of the state.
To protect the government.
Yeah.
And more our tax money is spent to protect the government. People are realizing this. People are seeing it. And again, for the miracle of Elon Musk and his Doge project is, and some of it's luck. I don't think it's a miracle. I think some of it, he's just darn lucky. They are moving very rapidly, which is important. But these stories are igniting what people already feel.
I want to get to that. We were talking about Rome. I want to get to that real quick. Let me just say for the audience that what you're predicting, I completely agree with. So the New York Times said about, I don't know, 5-7 years ago that the internet, and specifically the social media era of the internet, not just the beginning with the America Online dial-up thing, is equivalent to the Gutenberg printing press in Europe in about the middle of the medieval ages, around 1550s, 50, 60. Just for everybody who knows, so you had to handwrite things out. Then they came up with this printing press that would just produce pamphlets, and so you had books. And now you had books in people's original ethnic languages, where most of the books before were Latin and only the people that could read were the priesthood. Now you're getting books printed in ethnic German and other ethnic languages, and it's available to the public. Within about 50 years of that, the Catholic Empire that had been in control for 1,000 years collapsed, and you had the formation of new states. So that's wildly quick at that time, where you have stable government for 1,000 years, and then within 50 years, total collapse and reformation, because of access to information.
Yeah.
And I think that's, New York Times has backed up what you're saying, that we're seeing they can't control the priestly class anymore. They can't control who has access to reading and books, and they can't make sure that you don't get to read the Bible in your ethnic German language. Now it's everywhere, and everybody has access, and the phones, and it can topple governments, as you've just pointed out. And I think our government may be aware of that. And it sounds like you're saying they're very aware of that, and somewhat concerned.
They're very aware of it. And also, what we have today is very visual too. People don't read books. They don't read encyclopedias. They don't know history. They know bits and pieces of it. That's what they're taught in public school. Even if you go to college and you get a history degree, you are going to get bits and pieces based on whatever classes. That we don't have that liberal education that is really comprehensive, that really makes the connections for people. So nobody knows. We don't know history. We know this and that. But what is, because we're human, we have eyes, we're predators. Our eyes are in the front of our faces. We are looking. Okay. And because we're looking, that is a common universal language. And because imagery, because of data compression and the technology that we have, we can see a video instantly, live stream, whatever. We can share as people of the planet, which is not necessarily a good thing for countries, but as people, we can share data that we see, visual data. We can share emotions. And think about, I'm not like big on emotions. I mean, I don't understand, I'm not comfortable with emotions, but that's how you get a revolution. Also, you have to have that emotional connection.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's not just fear. It's often anger. It's pursuit of justice. It's whatever the things that brings people together and activates their energy. And that is an emotional thing. And guess what? Emotions flow, like electricity around the planet. The right image. And again, I think coming back to what we saw at the ceasefire and the 1.8 million Gazans that are still walking on 2 feet are flowing into their wrecked and destroyed and devastated areas, and the emotion that brings forth, and it's an amazing thing. And it connects people who either cheer it, or it frightens the living daylights out of people if they see this as a major loss, writing on the wall. What are we going to do now? We're desperate. And again,
Yeah.
definitely predict, and I'm not the only one, but I predict, of course, that the government of Israel will collapse relatively soon.
I've heard,
it'll reform, but it is not a stable government, and it's not going to be a stable government because the country itself is terrified.
They've lost a bunch of Israelis. You won't see that in the mainstream news. A lot of people have left. A lot of people with American passports. The entire northern division of Israel is completely abandoned. Those people are living in hotels. And I got to imagine the fright of rocket attacks coming into your city. They were told the Iron Dome could protect them, and Hezbollah proved that that's not, and Iran, that that's not exactly true. So their protection system they thought they had isn't living up to snuff. I do want to get to the main meat and potatoes.
Okay.
So just because I want to get into the conversation about Rome, you were laying out a bunch of stuff. I studied Rome. I was immediately intrigued massively. So just to cut to the meat and potatoes. So the Colonel did an article on Unraveling Secession of World War II. You can find it at the Mises Institute. She also did an interview with Judge Napolitano where they covered that same article. So this is the article. You can find it there. And then there was I think it was called Unraveling and something on Judge Napolitano. And the question was, the judge is asking her, is the U.S. in danger of unraveling? And the Colonel was kind of saying, well, there's not going to be a hard secession. What's going to happen is the empire will sort of soft die, but not really die due to lack of interest. And what she was pointing out was, this is like what happened in the Soviet Union. So what happened was the Soviet Union was not working, and it was corrupt, and it didn't care about the people, and it was clearly a failure, and the life quality of people started falling. Maybe there was a debate in the 50s and 60s if communism could work, but by the late 1970s, early 80s, it was apparently obvious to all of them it just wasn't working. And they were serfs now in the system they tried to leave and found themselves right back into. On the surface, the Soviet people, and this is the story I heard because I had to take Russian literature. So I heard about this, and the professor had consulted for the CIA on history, etc. But so she really knew her stuff, and she was like, they acted like, oh yes, loyal citizen, comrade, I'm right here with you. And then they wouldn't show up to work, and they wouldn't really listen to the political speeches, and they wouldn't vote, and they wouldn't really participate. And they kind of just acted out the thing because they didn't want to get arrested by the police, but nobody really cared. Nobody had any passion. Nobody was concerned about keeping it up. And basically just, they weren't really participating in the government. They started doing their own things. And that's what allowed for the quick collapse of the Soviet Union, as we saw. When there was a little bit of push by the public to overthrow it, there was no resistance. A lot of people in the military were not coming out. I remember they brought the tanks out, and then they just stopped because the soldiers were like, I'm not really up for this. This is a job, bro. I'm not going to roll over people. Also, I mean, come on, things don't work. So they didn't have government officials, military officials. They didn't have a counter public protest. It was a little bit of push, and it collapsed. And people thought, wow, how quick was that? It wasn't really a surprise. They were rotted at the core for a long time. They had lost the support of the people, the belief of the people in the system. And like Syria, when a push came, there was nobody to push back. It just, and then they're in charge. Do you see that? First, is that a fair summary of what you were saying on Judge Knapp? Did I get anything wrong? How would you change what I said?
I mean, I think what it is these mechanistic governing systems. Communism certainly would have been, Russian communism, that version of communism would have been a mechanistic system. We do this, we do that, everybody fits in, and a machine. It's a machine. And you forget, in America, we do the same thing in this country, atomizing everybody and counting everybody and, calculating everything and telling people what to. But the thing is, a country or a society that has a government of some sort, it sticks together through the word you mentioned, passion. It sticks together because there is a shared belief. Same way a church will do this too. Little churches, we have throughout the country, little churches everywhere in the country. And some of them are small, but they last a long time.
Right.
And it's because they got the people with the spirit.
Right.
The commitment.
The Holy Ghost.
That's right. And but then you have them that sometimes they're quite large, and they'll fall away. They'll collapse, and that's because they have not delivered, connected, inspired, or whatever. Oftentimes, we of course you read about it in the news, but if you've got a pastor or some sort of a priest, and what has happened is he or she has committed a crime or done something unforgivable or embarrassed themselves in some terrible way. That's a pretty, people will go, they flee that. Okay. No, we're not going to protect you. Most people will walk away. And if enough people walk away, you have your center of gravity's gone and the church is gone. Well, we don't think of government like church, and it isn't church, but it does rely on the belief of the people. So yeah, absolutely. The Russians long ago stopped believing in the Soviet system, except for how they could utilize it. And something you were saying reminds me of what we see in Africa, particularly in the old days when there used to be a plane wreck and out in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Go and try to find the crash site, and they couldn't find it. And they said, well, why can't we find this crash? We know it crashed right here. Where is it? But then they come to find out that it has been cleaned up by people who took the parts of the plane that were useful, the metal, everything, and they went and used it in a different way. They took those resources that no longer a flying aircraft, and they took this stuff and they used it. They marketed it. They used it in their homes. They sold it. And there's no crash left. There's no evidence really that there was an airplane there at all.
Right.
Well, that's how when governments fail, when they're failing, they are also being cannibalized even as they're still alive. And we know that
Fascinating.
We saw a lot of that in the Soviet system because, people would, if it was a socialist, we all own it. So I all have a piece of it. This is a socialist country. I own, we pick on government people for taking pens home, right? Well, right. In the Soviet system, since everything is owned by everyone, they would take home, 100-pound bags of fertilizer for my backyard garden. Why? Well, it's ours. It's
ours. It's all the property. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that's kind of a cynical play on words because they knew exactly what they were doing, but they had the cover of, I'm just a good Soviet. And anyway, but this loss of a belief in the system is what kills and destroys governments. It is, you don't need a violent revolution. You really don't.
Right.
And I don't honestly think in this country we will get a violent revolution. I think we'll get what we're kind of describing, a falling away, a new type of gravitation of people's interests and energies and imaginations that is not towards DC, but is in a different direction. And that will destroy the power of the state. Now, the state is not stupid. And again, that's why we have the surveillance state. That's why they are constantly participating in wars to frighten us. And that's why they're developing, we have all these biological labs so they can develop diseases. Well, it's for a war. Well, actually, no, it's not. That's to keep the people under control and to be able to inspire fear. And, we have plenty of real life examples, but that movie V for Vendetta, of course, the book.
Yep. God, I've heard that reference so many times.
Yeah. I tell you what.
Oh God, that's okay.
Yeah. But in that, in the story there was, of course, that the government needed a crisis. And so it created one. Now we have we say, oh, that's fantasy, that's fiction. Oh, and it's from the UK. That's nothing. But anyway, we have a huge
Yeah.
number of examples, and they're being publicized, and you can go to your
Yeah.
phone and read about any number that you want of things that our government or parts of our government have done on domestic soil to Americans or to others in order to influence Americans, to cause fear, to make them
Oh
behave
yeah.
the way.
Yeah.
This is how governments survive, and they only do this when they realize they're on the receding end of their cycle, and that's where our government is. Our government is failing. It's been failing for a long time. It's continuing to fail, and God bless Trump for trying to save it, but he will not be able to.
Trump's not going to be able to save America.
No.
So
And he might.
too far gone for him to fix it.
I think we're way too far gone for him to fix it. Unless now, okay. He says, "Are we going to fix our money?" Fixing the money goes a long way to fixing the credibility of the state.
Okay.
And but fixing the money is the most dangerous thing Trump can do. Okay, it's the most difficult thing he can do, and it's the most dangerous thing. And if he tries to fix the money, basically the fake money, however money is used, who controls it, where it goes, as he tries to fix that, he puts himself in a vulnerable position. And I won't say anything else, but the man's been.
I already get what you're saying. Yeah, I already get what you're saying. It's like when Alan Greenspan was standing next to Ronald Reagan, I think on the Wall Street trading floor, and he goes, "Wrap it up." Greenspan told Reagan, "Wrap it up." So Greenspan told the sitting president of America on camera on Wall Street thing, "Wrap it up. Like, I call the shots, not you." And then later on, he went on TV and said, "I do what I want." And Reagan said nothing. So it was kind of a Trump move, like, I punked you out, who's really in charge here? And it was on TV. So, we saw that back then. And that's what they said with, when it comes to the money, no, you don't get democracy. That's basically what they were advertising back in the 1980s. Also, just to back you up a little bit, here we go, or what we're talking about. Public trust in the government. This is from Pew, 1958 to 2015. You can look at that chart. Historic low levels. Not good enough. Let's go to 2024. Continued historic low levels. Modest increase since 2023. Basically, the least trust in government since the 1960s.
Yeah.
And here is this study the Colonel and I were talking about. Northwestern University, Princeton University, Martin Gillens and Benjamin I. Page studied more than 20 years worth of data to answer a simple question: does the government represent the people? The answer is no. The opinions of 90% of Americans essentially have no impact at all. Nobody's challenged that study. So if you're a voter, no one cares what you think. The government doesn't respond to you. And you've had the lowest faith in government basically continuously since 2000, since the late 1960s or early 1960s till now. There was a obvious increase during the 9/11 attacks under Bush, but you can see that was dissipated in that chart within just a few years. So there was a bump and then it was gone, and we were right back to the normal schedule that had patterned out over the last 3 decades. Colonel, you talked about in the Roman Empire, you had Romans who would not show their Roman passport or identify as Romans when they were traveling to other lands. And you had compared that to Doge project or Dogecoin under Elon Musk, and some people saying, well, I don't feel like I want to pay my federal taxes because I don't feel connected to the American government anymore. Could you explain that in the way that you presented it?
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know a huge amount about the Roman Empire, but I do know that the cycle of the Roman Empire is what it's always been held up, is that what will happen to America as we become an empire, which we already are. How will we fail? Because Roman Empire failed and collapsed eventually. It took a long time. But one of the things that happened long before it actually collapsed, it had many conquered people. And at the beginning of the empire, when it was a golden empire, people were happy to consider themselves Romans. Okay, they were proud of it. And as it began to fail and people lost credibility, of course, the taxing, the degradation of Roman coin, by the various emperors, and that people then, when people on the periphery, initially on the periphery, the most recently conquered peoples, stopped identifying as Romans, stopped calling themselves Romans, and continued to call themselves what they were before they were conquered by the Romans. And little by little, that circle of loyalty, or that periphery of loyalty, got bigger and bigger, and people closer and closer to Rome still didn't want to identify as Roman. And ultimately, of course, if nobody identifies with your empire, and they don't obey you, and they don't care, and they don't pay your taxes, they don't pay their taxes, and they refuse in some way, or they simply leave, they go away. That's how an empire fails, and it's how a country fails. It's how a church fails. People just go away, and initially they don't go away physically; they go away mentally. They go away in their heart. Their heart is, the relationship is gone. It's like I mentioned, like a divorce might be. You don't wake up one day and yesterday was wonderful, but today I'm getting a divorce. No, it's a transition period where the heart is not excited anymore. The passion is gone. The love isn't there. The shared agenda of the couple is no longer there. And you work through these things. This doesn't seem, but I've been here a long time. I'm invested. But then at some point, for when divorces happen, they happen. And then when the people look back, they will tell you when they knew when it happened. And it's
Right.
way before the actual
that moment they did this or said that, or yeah.
That's right. So that's how things break. That's how things break up and break down. The spiritual energy that keeps things together is being dissipated. And again, our government, whatever you call it, our parties, the way our government treats us, they think we're all atomized little numbers on a census, that we will do this and we will work and we will produce GDP and we will pay 35% taxes and we will be reliable. And then next year we'll do that. And then we'll have 2.3 kids. And one of those kids will go into the military voluntarily and be a soldier on our battlefields. And all these things will happen. And they forget we're not machines. Okay. There is an animating spirit in individuals and in communities and in countries. And when that animating spirit of a country becomes dissipated, which is what we see. And, we see conflict, that we have a lot of loud, noisy conflict, like the Democrats, the liberals. Oh, I'm a liberal. I love my country. I'm a conservative. I love my country. We say that, but the real problem is we don't, neither one.
Let me ask you about that. So I think you were saying an emotional separation, an emotional divorce. The heart is leaving, maybe it's still connected. And you were talking about soft secession. I think maybe California or Texas or other places where they just kind of start doing their own thing. They don't say we're leaving. They don't say divorce. It's the year before the divorce when you've already made up your mind that you're going to get divorced, and you're just kind of dreading the paperwork, but you're already living separate lives. You're already in separate homes. You're not really seeing each other. You're already making plans on the kids, but you haven't said divorce. Nobody said divorced. Okay. We didn't say divorce. I'm just moving along. And you look back and you go, I know that moment when I first got my own apartment while I was still married was the moment I was going to get divorced a year later. I've heard statistically that a lot of people have divorced a year to 2 years in their head before they actually file the paperwork psychologically.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about the loss of fealty, the loss of emotional passion, the loss of this is and I identify it. Recently, we had the Palisades fire in California. That was a horrendous fire. A lot of people were responsible for incompetence. I don't want to get into that, but clearly there's a lot of fair blame to be there. Talk to some reporters and that's clear. People are dead. People are homeless. People are destitute. People are in the streets who've never been in the streets before, and there's millions of them, and everything's failed, and they're living in kind of a apocalyptic thing, and they're beside themselves. And in their opinion, Donald Trump came on TV and said, I'm not sure I want to help you guys with federal assistance because I don't really like you guys. Maybe I want to force you to do some things with your policy. I'm not sure, bro. Now, I brought that up to some of my conservative colleagues, and they go, but he did show up and he did give money. Okay. But when I talk to people out of the Palisades fire, they are beyond consolable
Mhm.
and they are so enraged, there's no talking them down. How dare you do that when we are at our worst thing? The way I compared it was, let's say you're at your mother's funeral and she's in the coffin and someone walks up and smacks her in the face and then looks at you and goes, see you later, homie. The next year they come back and go, hey, I want to buy out your home. I want to pay off your medical bills. I want to buy you a new car. Do you forget what they did because they bought you a new car, or do you never forget? Which one, Colonel?
Oh, you never forget that. No.
Oh,
And I'll tell you, you mentioned what's in California, which is horrendous. The Helene disaster in Eastern Tennessee, Western North Carolina. The way FEMA worked under Biden, unfortunately, was very slow,
horrible.
very unfunded.
Horrible. Yeah.
And so they went through that slap in the face and whatnot.
Well, I mean, Biden never said, I'm not sure I'm going to help. Now, he completely ignored Palestine, Ohio. That was disgusting.
Yeah, that was kind of weird, too. That was very
Yeah.
weird, actually.
Yeah, that was a red area. He didn't want to go. He didn't want to get criticized. No president has said, I'm not sure I want to help.
Yeah. No, I mean,
that's Trump.
Trump is well, honestly, you remember when FEMA was this was in Helene in Florida, and a FEMA supervisor got in big trouble because she advised her people, if you saw a Trump sign, don't bother knocking on their door.
Oh
now,
my God, I didn't
know. It's for sure. She lost her job, I think, temporarily. Yeah, but there was a reason she said that. This is the reason she said that. They're in rural central Florida. The people with Trump signs generally said, I don't want your help. This was experience. Okay. So she wasn't like, oh, I hate Trump people. We're not going to do that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
She said to her people, she said, if you see a Trump sign, you knock on the door, don't wait around.
Okay.
Generally, our numbers are telling us they're not going to want your help. They don't like FEMA. They don't like the government. They don't like Biden. They don't like us. Don't waste a lot of time trying to go to the next house. She said this. She did say this. Now, it was reported, and it was obviously not right. She got in big trouble, and people made a case that, well, Biden only wants to help Biden's supporters.
Sure.
That's not 100% true, but that's the perception. And the North Carolina people, that's the red part of North Carolina, they're Trump supporters. And there was kind of that same messaging happening, that these are Trump supporters, let them hang. Now, what Trump did in Palisades is the same thing. Not really Trump supporters out here. So guess what? Trump is very unfiltered and over the top. In many ways, I think he has some sensitivities, but there's an example of where he is totally doesn't have the tools. He just says what he thinks. And he's also like a lot of people, he talks his way through what he thinks.
Sure.
And a lot of us like that. We talk or write. A lot of people will write their way. I like to write. Figure out what I think. Trump talks his way. He doesn't write. He talks until he figures out what he's saying. And meanwhile, all the stuff that he's saying is being interpreted in exactly the same way that the Florida people and the North Carolina people interpreted the Biden FEMA, what they saw. They saw, well, Biden doesn't like us and he's not going to help us. Now, whatever reason, all of this is healthy. And I hope it's not healthy what they're going through right now, but it's very, very, very healthy when people in a survival situation or any other kind of situation. When I say survival, I don't mean from the fire or anything. I'm talking about survival as a country.
Yeah.
When we all make that realization that no one's going to help you, no one's coming, Calvary's not coming.
Right.
And there's this great book, and I've referenced it, I've talked about it a number of times. Years ago, I read it, it was called Deep Survival. Have you ever heard of that book?
No, I'm going to pull it up right now.
It's written by a guy with I've got the book here somewhere. He has a Hispanic last name. He was a reporter.
Gonzalez.
There you go. Yep. reporter, I believe, for National Geographic and Outside Magazine and things like that. So he was a guy that reported on these things. And what he did was he studied survivors in extremists, people who had gotten lost in the upstate Washington, in the middle of winter, and survived after 3 weeks. And how did they live? And then other people who did not survive similar crises. And he looked at plane wrecks. He looked at all kinds of disasters. And he said, what is it? What is it? Who lives, who dies, and why? What is this that is the difference between the guy that walks out of the jungle or walks out of the forest, or and the guy who doesn't? And I could go through this. I read it years ago, but one of the big things, and it's actually, I think, the first thing, the person who survives is the person who very quickly realizes they are going to die. You're lost. Let's say you're lost in the woods, and you think you're lost, but you're not sure. And anybody that's ever, the whole stereotype that men won't ask for directions. Well, that's not true. But anyway, there's a stereotype, right, that we always joke about. Well, the man won't ask for directions. Well, part of that is he's not lost, right? And I know women are the same exact way. I'm not lost. I'm not lost. I'm not lost.
No comment.
Right.
No comment.
Exactly what I'm talking about. So
I didn't comment, Mom. You see that?
One of the first things that the survivors do is they recognize the dark and deadly reality of where they are. Okay. And they recognize they're going to die, that the chances of them surviving is already down to 1%. And they have to realize this. Now, you can also overreact. Maybe it's not 1%, maybe it's 10%. But the person who says, you know what, it's 1%, I am going to die. Step one, because as soon as you realize that you're lost, you're going to die, and nobody's coming for you, you are suddenly liberated. From what? You're liberated to find solutions. You are liberated to act in a way that is totally based on your immediate reality. You can think. Stress is gone, right? If you're going to die in 5 minutes, honestly, a peace comes over you. I'm sure your life may flash before your eyes, but there's not much you can do. So you actually at that point stop fighting, kind of like a wild animal. Wild animals will die of stress. A deer gets hit. Sure. They may not be wounded enough to die, but oftentimes they will die almost immediately from a stress reaction. They shut down. So anyway, this idea that we are in a state of extremis of some kind, economic, political, geographical, fires, disasters, we've lost everything. And we realize no one's coming to help us. Now, obviously, we want neighbors and friends and anybody. We will take help from anybody. But what Americans believe, what many people believe in their own countries, is that the government will help them. Now, the Soviets didn't. The Soviets had no possible conceptions in the 1960s and 70s that if something bad happened, their government would save them. They knew it wouldn't. Americans, though, we're not there yet. We're not quite there yet. Many Americans think that their government will save them. Sure. And they will save them through FEMA, or they'll save them because they'll fight off enemies. They'll somehow provide life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They'll protect us economically. People believe this, and they want to believe it. And those people who fail to give that up early on in this crisis are not going to, they don't survive, and that's deep survival. But this is where, so there's an advantage for the people in North Carolina, people in California, people in Florida. Did the government help you? Did they help you quickly, or did they hold it over your head with a political, thing like?
They didn't. No, FEMA's not that great. I totally agree.
Of course not. No, of course not. How about COVID? Did the CDC save anybody?
No, they didn't. Yeah, they didn't do a good job. And California also during COVID said, we're going to do our own thing and ignore federal regulations and reopen the economy on their own. And then we also said we're a nation state while we're doing it. Yeah. And then we're going to act on our own and reach out to China. So we immediately embraced nation statism.
California, really, attitude-wise, is an ideal candidate for its own country, attitude-wise. Financially, fiscally, politically, I'm not so sure. Although
World's fifth largest economy,
fifth
the only
largest,
top 10 economy within the U.S.
that's
It's
exactly
not
right.
its own separate
That's
country.
exactly right. And
Uh,
geographically and resource-wise, very blessed country. I mean, a state, I should say country. I'm calling them a country
all
already.
of the country, it's fine. Our governor does. Our governor calls it a nation state.
Yeah. No, it's a wonderful thing. And also too, this is another thing that's happening around the world, and we're seeing it. And Trump is all over the place with this. Let's move the Gazans out. Let's take over Denmark. Whatever it is he's trying to do. Not Denmark, Greenland. But what he is doing with his, I'm thinking with my mouth moving. That's just what I think he's doing most of the time. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely not. He has a great mind.
Sure.
I appreciate that he is thinking outside the box. But one of the things he's doing is he's allowing the whole rest of the world to think outside the box. And our hypocrisy in foreign policy, what did we do? We toppled Iraq, and initially they were going to make 3 countries out of Iraq, and Syria is going to get broken in pieces.
Kurdistan, Shia, Sunni, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we have our own hypocrisy has kind of opened the door for people to say, well, wait a minute, countries can change. Countries can divide. Countries can secede peacefully. We don't hear a lot about the Czech Republic and Slovakia, but they had a very peaceful, what they called a velvet divorce, where they agreed to separate themselves, and they did so.
Right.
And these are, and also too, another thing, I teach online government class, and at some point there's a question on a quiz. We have to write an essay about secession, secessionary movements, and I usually start them out with Hawaii, for example, because Hawaii, you have an indigenous population, you have a bad history of being lied to, and there's a small movement there for that. Well, anyway, I say pros and cons. What do you think? How would this work? And almost to a person, because this is how our public schools teach them. And why our public schools teach them this way? Because it's government schools and the government is protecting itself. But what they say to a person, oh, there's no way that Hawaii could economically support itself or defend itself without the United States. And I point out to them that of the 182 countries in the planet, plus or minus, most of them are far smaller than Hawaii would be. Most of them are smaller than Rhode Island. And yet they have this fantasy in their mind. It's not a fantasy. It's just what they've been taught, that, you got to be big. And you don't. Because I'm actually, if we had to take if we were going to bet which states in the Union will spin off, will spin off as independent countries or get secession either practically or subdivide from another state. Okay, where will we see this happening? Well, California, long history. Idaho, what do you call it? The eastern part of Idaho. They're actually putting that on
Greater
ballot.
Idaho movement.
Greater Idaho movement. But I think Vermont will do it. They have a tight, small little thing. They have a reputation kind of like Switzerland. It's not for chocolates, but cheese and apples and Vermont stuff. So they have natural beauty. They have certainly an educational and a tourism base. If nothing else, they probably have lithium there for all I know. But in any case, Vermont's tiny. It has not a lot of people. Easily, it could be independent. Anyway, this is a fun game to play.
Well, I do want to ask you though about the Palisades thing, if I may. So you're right. It was perceived that Biden was not helping red states. The Palestine, Ohio, the train wreck there, big thing. The difference though that I'm being told is that he never said that. He never said I'm not going to help, whereas Trump talked through it, vocalized it.
Oh, and
and to people in California, they're like, wow, that's never happened before. I can't believe you said that. When my mom's in the coffin, they're pointing to things like this. They're pointing to things like where he did that. They're also pointing to the fact that Speaker Johnson said the same thing. So it's not just Trump. It was 2 different people. And if you go by the power in the federal government, it goes president, vice president, speaker. So 2 of the top 3 most powerful people said this. That's never happened before. They're also looking at the fact that just months before, There was an LA Times survey that showed that 48% of Republicans don't view Californians as American.
Oh,
They
wow.
don't view Californians as American. That came out months before. And then Californians in LA are seeing the president and Speaker of the House seemingly act on that. And then they're also pointing out things like this, where the Republican Party had an entire national convention where they painted California as the anti-America. So there's a lot of people in LA and California going, you guys are saying we're not American. You're saying we're not American. And then when we're destitute, you're saying, I don't know if I want to help. And there's 2 out of 3 of you saying that.
Wow.
That seems to bother them and has led to what's known as a resurgence of the Cal Exit movement here in California. There's a lot of popularity for that.
It's great. I would thank Trump for that.
Okay. Well, yeah, it has. It has.
No, because see, Trump is he says things, what he says oftentimes are true on the face of them. I mean, he doesn't sugarcoat it, so to speak.
He shoots from the hip.
He shoots from the hip, and he hurts people's feelings. Obviously, in this case,
sometimes, yeah.
Plus, it's not very diplomatic. It's not very presidential. That is actually the most non-unifying thing that he could do in the moment, I guess, is as he did that. But I don't want unity. I personally don't believe that national unity is something that we should have. I think that we are way too big to be a constitutional republic, and that's why it doesn't work. We are an empire. We should not be an empire. So how do we resolve that? How do we, people say, oh, take back the republic. Okay, well, that would be nice, but you can't put
right. Let's return federalism back to the 1800s level, right? I've heard that idea.
Yeah, no, this country is an empire, and empires collapse and fail, and they can do it sloppily, slowly. They can do it in a calculated way. They can do it violently, or they can do it peacefully. And it would be ideal if we could do it in a planned and peaceful and evolutionary type way. That would be best for all the people involved. That would be best for the world, best for peace, best solution over. So how do we get there? Well, we listen to the words Trump says, and we say, is that the kind of country, central government, that I feel as the 5th largest economy in the world, that I should pay that many federal taxes to? I don't think so. I don't think I should do that. And Californians should not pay their taxes. No one should pay them. But Californians, very specifically, after what's been suffered there now, and based on this story, which is not a story, but what Trump said and what he is doing, he has shown the true colors of the federal state. Nothing wrong with that. Thank you, Mr. Trump, for showing us that. Now, we also got to see it with Biden, too, though. Think about it.
True. Biden never said, but yes.
But also, no, he was incompetent. He was not running the country.
Oh, yeah.
He was running the country, but he wasn't running the country because his brain was completely fried for the whole duration of his term.
I have nothing to say in opposition to
that. So he is a guy that we're told, oh, Mr. Biden is your president. Mr. Biden is running our federal United States of America, when in fact we knew it was not true. When you're lied to your face, and Democrats knew it. They knew better than Republicans. Republicans weren't paying attention. They thought, oh, well, surely, we wouldn't do that in our party. So surely they wouldn't. And the Democrats are going, God, how do we keep this secret? Because if the people find out, we're in big trouble. So bad government, led by a man with dementia, now led by a man with an unfortunate ability to blurt out the truth.
Just unfiltered, 100% unfiltered.
So why would you want that? This is good. Anything that causes us to question the
I see what you're saying.
Control and power of Washington, D.C. is a good thing. But California, with that size of an economy, they really should be, they should lead the way. Now, I'll give you a little example. I've talked about this tiny little example. It happened years and years ago under George Bush. Because George Bush did No Child Left Behind. And No Child Left Behind required that all the little schools in all the states had to show progress. And if they failed to show progress year after year, at a certain point, they would lose federal funding, which is...
I remember this. No Child Left Behind. Yeah.
Yeah. So Utah, not very great schools, but the Utah people like them. They were in trouble because they had stopped showing progress. So they got their letter from Department of Education, and they said, you have failed to make progress. We are going to have to withhold
Yes.
percentage of your money. And Utah said, you know what, Governor and this Utah Secretary of Education said, keep your money. It's very little. We don't need it. And we're tired of being told what to do. We are quite happy with our schools. Bye-bye. And what happened? So you said, oh, wow. Oh, wow. You mean they could do that? Oh, that's crazy. You know what happened? Do you know the end of the story? Do you know what happened?
I think they just did it and went ahead and made their own policy.
Utah said, we don't need your money. We're fine. We're good. We're not doing it. No, that wasn't good enough. Department of Education, the Secretary of Education flew from Washington to Salt Lake City, sat down, literally begged the Secretary of Education and the governor, please, please, please take our money. We will waive all our requirements. You must participate. You must accept the money and you must participate. We'll waive. Don't worry. We were just.
That doesn't make sense.
Oh, it makes sense because the federal government needs us way more than we need them. Because by participating in any federal program, you are providing legitimacy. You are providing meaning to the federal state. If FEMA can't perform and doesn't deliver, God bless America. Next time we have a disaster, stay home, FEMA. Do not need you, do not want you. Our experience with you is bad. We don't need you. We will, as a state, as a community, as a people, as a society, we will take care of ourselves. That's independence. That is
It is. Yes. And Trump did bring that up in his meeting with Californians. Why don't you have your own system? It was truly bizarre to see Brad Sherman, a Californian, arguing with the president of America on why we need a federal system. And he was like, Trump said rightfully, hey, you have enough people in California to do it. And Sherman said, well, maybe. And he goes, you do. And he's like, okay, you're right, we do.
Oh my
and then Sherman's immediate thing back was, but what about Rhode Island and Vermont? They need FEMA. And it was incredible to see somebody who represents California saying, okay, well, yeah, you're right, we could do it on our own, but Mr. President, please don't give up on the federal system because of all the other states. That's normally the argument the president would be making. And now somebody from the states, truly bizarre theater, theater.
The other thing is, too, all these agencies that we're so dependent on, Department of Education, FEMA, most of this came in the 70s. This is not something that we ever needed before.
Right.
So anyway, people have to have that spirit of a center of their lives, of their country that is not in Washington, that is not dependent on DC. And I think just like with the divorce, it's not so much that, what is the opposite of love? The opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. And we need to develop a national, state by state, county by county sense of indifference to the federal government. And that's happening. And I don't know if it's completely by design, but I'm just saying the DOGE project by exposing the utter stupidity and waste and fraud. I think there will be some people in jail for as they go through these agencies. I mean, certainly with Hillary, did Chelsea Clinton's wedding really get paid for by tax dollars from USAID? I mean, this is one of the things that they have exposed. If that turns out to be true, what a powerful, powerful example of why we do not need Washington. It exacerbates also the class warfare situation that we have developed, economic classes, as people are struggling. And then you see the very wealthy hangers-on of government benefit.
Government money for their largesse. To back you up on that, the rich have only been getting richer. So economists have pointed out, go ahead and look this up online, anybody watching the show, 2008 recession, massive amount of money went from the middle class to the 1%. COVID, 2022, massive amount of money went from the middle class to the 1%. They're not saying exactly how it happened, but we had these two major disruptions, and I don't know who to blame, just accidentally sort of worked out at the end where a huge chunk of wealth that had been in the middle class was now permanently moved to the 1%. We had that in 2008, and then we had it again in 2022. So that's two within 10 years. That's well documented, and you can see the middle class being eroded.
Think about what you just said. Great. That is true fact. We've all seen it. The Russians in the 60s and late 50s saw this as well.
In their country.
Our country. We built our country from serfdom and being the most behind place on the planet. we built this country, we have this great achievements. We're told constantly how great the Soviet people are, the Soviet man and woman. And yet, where's the wealth going?
Mm-hmm.
They could see it in their daily lives.
Mm-hmm.
They knew who the people connected with government
Yeah.
were
Everything.
wealthier every time, ratcheting up the wealth, taking it from the country, taking it from the people and the workers. And so that creates a kind of contempt. Actually, not indifference. That creates contempt, which is, if you get too much contempt in this, then we get to more violent revolutions. We get problems. But if we can just shoot for indifference, I think we're going to be okay. Let's develop that indifference. And Trump has, I like a lot of things about Trump. I like his populism and I like his energy. I mean, I would love to be as energetic as him when I'm 79 years old. But
he does have energy. True.
Yeah, he has a lot of energy. That's admirable. But Trump is a great blessing for all of us who really want to see the empire ended, and we'd like to see liberty, decentralization, multiple constitutional republics existing where only one improperly functioning one was. It was really an empire. Trump is accelerating this in part because he inspires such contempt among people that otherwise would not be on our side about secession. Right?
You're 100% about that. Right, Colonel. Absolutely.
So we
billion% correct there. Billion%.
Yeah, you take the red state, the right wing, the conservatives, the libertarians. We're going to say government's bad. Too much government's bad. What a waste. We don't like it. We don't like it. And all the soft-hearted people in the left and everywhere else say, "Oh, you don't want to help your poor friends, and you don't believe in the social contract and all that." So, but Trump ignites them in a way that we could never do with logic, argument, or examples.
Completely correct. Have to totally concede to you on that. About 100 billion% on that. Yeah.
So if he's able to, and I don't want him to mistreat and hurt people's feelings and be cruel, but if he's
I get what you're saying.
If he moves California in the right direction, there are many places that are simmering that will do what California does. Or what you may find is people may want to join California and be a part of that free economy.
There was the Green Party member who's a sitting member of the Canadian government who 2 weeks ago asked California to secede and join Canada.
Oh,
I'm not joking. It was an official member of the Canadian government did that.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, this is the other good thing about that Trump has unleashed, and that is a kind of childlike imagination of what might be.
That's true.
He goes, "Oh, we're going to take over. We're going to take over Canada." What? Who in their right mind would ever even dream of saying that? Not my entire life have I ever heard anybody say anything that crazy. Right. Yeah. And yet, by imagining it, by playing an imagination game, then we can say, "Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, you know what? I don't want all Canada. I don't want the French-speaking part. Maybe Alberta." And so we're talking amongst ourselves. And then as we do that, we say, "Well, what else is possible?" And Trump is opening up possibilities. And of course, our hypocritical foreign policy, where some countries are sacrosanct and other countries can be totally manipulated and cut apart and taken away from their, we've done that for years.
We backed an Al-Qaeda ISIS leader who was considered Al-Qaeda and ISIS by the State Department, and now we're totally backing him as a Democratic leader. That's not opinion. The State Department called him that. I don't know how you live through 9/11, watch people falling out of skyscrapers, listen to 3,000 people are dead, and then it's cool to be working with Al-Qaeda and ISIS later, and he's not really like those guys. Although Ayman al-Zawahiri and al-Baghdadi knew him personally and gave him the position that he has.
Yeah. Well,
I cannot fathom how that's logical.
He is getting a CNN interview with the CNN crew, including American security and other diplomats and State Department people there. And he has a $10 million American bounty on his head, and yet it was okay to interview this guy. So our hypocrisy is also helping. And that's
part of an organization that killed Americans. He's part of an organization that killed Americans. He was personally appointed by two guys who were dedicated to killing Americans and have lots of blood on their hands. Personally appointed by Ayman al-Zawahiri, personally appointed by al-Baghdadi. Those are the guys that ran Al-Qaeda and ISIS. I don't get it.
Well,
I don't get it, and I'm blown away. The American people are disgusted by this.
our takeaway on this has to be, clearly, the United States government could care less about the American people.
That's it.
Lives of the
That's it right there. That's it right there. You use this for 9/11 for Iraq. You don't actually care about 3,000
No,
dead
not at all.
Americans, people jumping out of skyscrapers because they don't want to be burned alive.
And when our government
All of us have
says
watched it on television.
when our government tells us that it cares, we know you're lying. And how do we know that? Oh, I don't
Traumatized the
know.
whole country for years. I mean, I can't get those images out of my head. It's over a decade later. That's
Yeah.
seared in. I'll be on my deathbed and I'll still have that seared
Yeah.
in. And it was a game?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, you could do many shows on 9/11, but it was
Yeah, we're not going to go down conspiracy
no.
on YouTube censors and stuff.
What we do know is the government will use any crisis that is offered to the government that it stumbles over to enhance its own power and to pursue an agenda that 9 times out of 10 is not good for the American people. And as more people realize this, which they are, because I don't think a single Trump voter would disagree with me on this. They do not trust the government. This is why they put Trump up there. They said, we don't trust anybody. We told them.
Yeah.
People told them, get rid of the deep state. We don't trust anybody that's up there. Get rid of all of them. So, public trust in government. That's right. So, yeah, we're actually in a really good place because we've got what we need to make a decision as Americans, as individuals, as people that live in a community, as to how we want to live. Do we want to live like we're living, and do we want to serve this central state that has done nothing but lie and mislead and play political games with us and rape our economy and devalue our money? Is this what we want? Or maybe we just don't want that. So we're going to look at something different. We're in a good place. We're in a good place.
I want to ask you, we're winding down. I do want to ask you, though, you were saying, hey, what might be good is a peaceful, logical, nonviolent, peaceful, negotiated path to independence and maybe separation. Peaceful, negotiated, nonviolent. We're talking the Velvet Revolution. We're talking the collapse of the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia. We're talking the total opposite of the 1865 Civil War. Total opposite.
Yeah.
You are on the Judge Napolitano show occasionally. He's a well-respected judge. Some people in America are arguing that this court case exists. It's called Texas versus White.
Yeah.
In 1868, after the Civil War. It was decided by Salmon Chase. Salmon Chase was personally appointed by Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
So the guy that Lincoln said, this is my guy, oversaw this court case. This is after the Civil War, and it says, no, of course you can't unilaterally secede. You can't get your guns and shoot your way out. But at the bottom there, if you'll see that second blue line, there was no place for reconsideration or revocation except through revolution or consent of the states.
That's right. Meaning
the states could allow a state to go through a vote.
Yeah. That is true. You know, and that's really what we need to work on, is that orderly kind of process, a legal process, where we can really talk about what it is and see what it is. Because environment-wise, the political environment, the social environment in this country right now is a good time for California to push this through or to experiment with it. Or maybe not California, some other state. But we are in an environment where the many states may say, they may feel like, you know what, we're different enough, and this is non-threatening enough to us. It's a mutually beneficial thing that we could do it. And I'll tell you, I don't know how many people did not ever think that Roe v. Wade would ever be turned upside down. But the people that did Roe v. Wade, the people that wrote the case and wrote the decision, they actually expected that it wouldn't last very long because of the nature of medical technology. And they had a lot of caveats in Roe v. Wade that said, as technology changes and we're able to save babies later and, find pregnancies earlier and whatever it is, they said, we expect that this will be little more than a Band-Aid or a stopgap, to
get God. Wow.
To the next, to get us to that next legal decision. And that was from 72 or 73 to now. Think about this, the White case. That was about somebody didn't want to pay their debt. First off,
Yep.
a very narrow
Yep.
ruling on for a very specific purpose, and the purpose was,
Okay.
does the state supported guy get his money? Well, and here's a friend of the president, the judge. Of course, the guy that supported Abe Lincoln's going to get his money. So they a very weak case. So yeah, it's time. It's time to look at legal mechanisms. And another place you can look at, and they're doing that over here because in Virginia and West Virginia, some of these Western Virginia counties want to join with West Virginia, voluntarily leave the blue-purple state of Virginia and move over and be part of West Virginia, where it's, we have the same mountains, the same people, the same value system. And there is a path for that. There is a path for part of a state to move to another part of the state. And you're seeing it with the Greater Idaho movement too. So
there absolutely is. What I wanted to show you was this. So you are familiar with Texas versus White, and it sounds like you're saying it is a real court case and actually does exist. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, it's a court case that exists, but it is held up as an anti-secession ruling when it wasn't. It was a ruling.
Thank you.
It was about finding who owes money and who's accountable. I don't know, somebody bought a bond, and they said, do you have to pay it or service this bond or whatever? Right. I forget. I don't know the details, but it's held up as this anti-secession case. And there's actually a couple related similar ones that kind of they use. But yeah, Texas versus White, very, very vulnerable. Of course, anything from 1868, any court case during the Reconstruction and martial law of the South, it should all be suspect.
Okay. I mean, there is only one court case on secession, though, and it's this one.
And really? That's the only one that they call it? Okay, because there are a few other, I've read of some other rulings that they sometimes hold up to say this.
I'm really close with the Texas Nationalists, and they pointed out a couple other Supreme Court cases, but in American law, there's only one that actually deals with the word secession, period, end of story.
That makes it simple.
It's this one. And my understanding is the American legal system is called stare decisis in Latin, which means case law.
Yeah.
Which means if there's only one case, you can't ignore that. You have to. This is why lawyers go to law school, to study case law, previous cases. You can't just go, I feel strongly that this is the right thing to do. You have to base it on previous cases. If there's only one case in all of American history, and it came after the Civil War, and it was decided by the guy Lincoln put in there, and it says you can consent, I think maybe there's a legal justification that's a solid basis for something there, and that would allow for peaceful secession. That's the only reason I bring that up.
One of the ways a state loses or can give away certain counties to a neighboring state, basically a changing of the state border is basically what this is.
Yeah.
That only requires the people to want to do it. The local legislator, it requires if let's say two states are involved, both state legislatures have to be involved. So the receiving one has to say, I agree to take Shenandoah County into West Virginia. And then Shenandoah County has to go to Richmond, and Richmond has to say, we think it's okay. We think we will make a new borderline that now goes on the east side of Shenandoah County. So you're going to be part of West Virginia. If they both agree, it can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's,
and it has, things like this have been done to resolve the state border lines. So there's been a lot of different examples where something was done, it didn't make a lot of sense, and so they basically fixed it.
Absolutely. The issue is that right now in the media, they will not acknowledge that Texas versus White exists. They will not acknowledge that it says consent to the states, and they will not acknowledge that consent has never been defined. They will say either Texas versus White doesn't exist, or if they admit that it exists, they will say it says you can't secede, period, end of story. They will not admit the phrase consent to the states is there at all. Or they'll say Texas versus White says you must use an amendment. That's not in this language at all. It doesn't say amendment. It says through consent to the states.
And the other thing is, I think that court case, I don't know enough about the law, but if the case is being misused, if someone has a situation where white has been misapplied or inappropriately applied, then you have a way to get it back up into the system so it can be looked at. Because Roe v. when the Dobbs case, and I didn't follow it closely, but however it made its way up to the Supreme Court, it was linked, inexplicably linked to a conflict with Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
So they said, and I'm sure as the Supreme Court makes its choices, they say, oh, this will be an interesting case. This will be a complex case that really deserves to be resolved, because one old case is now being challenged legitimately.
Sure.
What does it mean? What did the original case mean?
What does it mean? What does it mean? You're going to have to define this now.
And this is what we have to know. And, you know, it's a sad case that the word secession is not a popular word. It should be a popular word. But it's not.
I don't like the misleading information. So, for example, here's this article: California secession has no credibility, insurmountable hurdle to the there's no mechanism for a state to leave the union currently in the Constitution. Will not mention Texas versus White, won't mention consent to the states, won't mention Salmon Chase, and won't mention that consent has been defined. Here's another one where they will admit Texas versus White is, but it says you cannot leave the
let me tell you,
end of story. No mention of consent at all.
That news and the people writing that news, of course, very simplistic, because, and you have to go back to the Civil War, which nobody wants to do, but prior to the Civil War, which was a war on, fought on economics and tariffs and all kinds of things in different cultures, and slavery's there too, all these things. But the thing was, the people, the founders, the ones who Jefferson, Adams, these guys who had been president and then were still alive as they watched the 40 years of our country, 60 years prior to the Civil War. These folks who had known or were the founders themselves and had participated in these deep discussions about forming a country, voluntarily having these colonies join the Union as states. Okay. What they were talking about, what they knew, what they studied, how they made their arguments, to a man, and I imagine some women too, they believed that this was not a one-way door. They didn't believe that, because when we ratified our Constitution with those first 10 amendments, why did we have those first 10 amendments? Because 5 or 7 states, they said, we're not joining. We're not joining unless we get our way here.
Right.
Implication was, if those had not been, let's say 9, the first 9 got ratified, but number 10, I don't know, we're not going to ratify that. Well, if they had mistakenly known, under the assumption that the 10th would have also been ratified, and then it was not, they're saying you can't get out of it. Of course they could have got out of it. They were holding, their very membership was a part of the body.
Right.
It wasn't like a rat trap, you go in, a live animal cage, go in, come on in, take the bait, and then you're done for. That's not how it was. That's not how we formed this. And the other thing too, is we added more and more states, many of them obviously were territories first, and they appealed for statehood if they wanted it. Some didn't want statehood for a long time, and others kind of had it rammed on them, like, Alaska and Hawaii. That was very much a political action to create those states. But among states like Wyoming really wanted to be a state at one point.
Yeah.
You know what they did to get to be a state? They gave women the right to vote in Wyoming. Did you know that?
I didn't, and I should have.
This was long before the 20th Amendment or 19th or whichever one gave women the right to vote at the national level. The states could let women vote if they wanted to. And the ones who did it were a number of Western territories who needed the population count in order to justify the request.
Interesting bedfellow politics.
It is interesting because what people need, what's the Rolling Stones song? You don't always get what you want, but you
get what you need. Yeah.
What Western states needed were voters. They gave many of the Western territories and states allowed women to vote to beef up their power and representative, whatever, to be states. And where women were marching, demanding the vote because they had not been allowed to vote. This was all along the East Coast, Boston, New York, all the way down. Very last states to grant women the right. And many of these Eastern seaboard states did not give women the right to vote until the amendment had been completely ratified. They refused until the very last minute to give women the right to vote because they didn't need it. They did not need it to their state. But so you get what you need. A state at the state level, at the legislature. So if California needs it, if it feels that it needs it and wants it and has passion for being that fifth largest economy and not being underneath a guy as crass as Donald Trump, who really hates California, which he doesn't, but in their minds he does. He certainly behaved as if he does.
Based on fair evidence.
There you go. So California should, they deserve, Californians, just like everybody else, deserves to get what they need. And this is kind of the nature of change, really. We act like, we have to wait until timing is right. No, you really don't. Just live your life, eyes open.
Yeah.
Don't be made a fool of by a central government. And again, all of these people that did not like Biden for his 4 years of being a weirdo.
Right. Sniffing people's hair from coming out from behind.
Looking at
13-year-old girls and saying, look at her legs. I got a niece and I was just like, what are you doing? What are you doing? She's going to watch this. And young girls watching that and thinking that's acceptable. That's not okay behavior.
No, not at all.
And it's not for an elected official.
And we're not proud of it. As Americans, we were not proud of our president.
I was like, what the hell are you doing, man? And then he'd have women stand next to him and they'd go, well, he's a great guy, right? Because Trump's the sexist and Biden is not. So after Biden sniffs a woman's hair, he's got to have a woman next to him going, this is my guy. What did they have? The Me Too movement, Alyssa Milano stood next to him and said, he's cool. And that was right after the New York Times reporter exposed that he had a more credible rape case than anything Trump had. So there was clearly duplicity early on.
It's true.
On behalf of all women in my life, my mom, mi tías, my abuelita, that was disgusting. I don't know why that was allowed.
It helps with, you got to thank him. Hopefully no one was harmed with the Biden administration. I'm sure many people were. But the fact
Juanita Broderick left the country, but yeah.
Yes, she did. Well, she was harmed by him too. Anyway, we don't have faith in Washington. And that adds to this lack of faith, this lack of trust, this contempt for Washington. It's additive, it's useful, it's creative, and it can help take us to a better place, which, obviously secession is a peaceful secession. It's a wonderful thing. It leads to more freedom and more liberty. We deserve it. As Americans, it's part of our expectation.
We deserve it. Well, that's what I want to ask you is if this is the truth, they're not admitting that. They have articles coming out saying either Texas versus White doesn't exist,
right,
or it does not say consent. And what it said was amendment. The amendment word is not in there at all. Right. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we have other professors like Erwin Chemerinsky, who's the dean of 2 California law schools. And he said, when asked about CalEx in 2017, in theory, because it was a majority vote of Congress to admit California, in theory, a majority of vote of Congress could approve secession. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And that also is the same as when a state trades off a part of itself to a neighboring state.
Sure.
The people agree. They initially locally agree.
Right.
The legislatures agree.
Right.
And then simply rubber stamp it at the federal level because it's in the states.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's a democracy. It's voting. It's negotiation. Nobody shot their way out. Nobody shot at federal institutions. No. They said, let's have a negotiation and a vote. Is that democracy?
I'll tell you what, if they don't want to do it peaceably, that the White case also says revolution. So here are your choices. I think everyone would prefer to do it.
No place for revolution except through revolution or consent to the states. And and this is right after the Civil War. And here Salmon Chase probably saw a lot of dead people and a lot of destruction. And he's like, my God, we can't do this again. So he needed to outline, you can have a vote, or we can go at it again and just destroy the hell out of ourselves. 600,000 dead or something like
Right.
way before you even
And
saw World War One.
also too, remember, in 1968, we were still the southern state, the Confederate states that had fought were all under martial law. So I would say there's probably a legal case specifically looking at any number of, in fact, we already have revisited. Look at all the bad Jim Crow type laws, the bad laws that went in there. And what did we do with those laws? We said they were passed under martial law. They were inappropriately passed in a very strange time in our history. Is this good law? And much of it was not good law. And of course, the White case is not good law either, but it could be good law because it does have that little hook that you need.
It's the only one there. And under the legal system, you can't ignore cases. The whole American legal system is based upon cases. There's other systems called common law where you may have some professors say, we think this is the way the law should be. I know Australia did that. In America, it's case law. If you can't cite previous cases, you don't argue anything, period, end of story. So there's only one court case. You can't ignore it, therefore.
No, that's true. But also, to think about Trump's plan to take on Canada. Are we going to have a vote on that? Because there's ways.
The Canadians would have to vote yes, too.
Well, what I'm saying is when powerful entities, states, governments, people, capitalists, bankers, when they decide to do something, they find a way to do it. And so ultimately, I think we will find our way to do the things that need to be done. And secession is definitely long overdue. It needs to happen in many different ways and many different examples. I love that California is thinking about doing that. Love it.
Yes. And so if you do see the judge, does Texas versus White exist?
Oh, I know he knows it exists.
Well, but we need more people saying this who have a legal background, because other people are saying it, and they'll put a lawyer on TV, and the lawyer goes, "Texas versus White doesn't exist," or
it absolutely
isn't there.
You can find it on Justia. It's a legitimate case, and it's held up constantly as the secession case.
I agree, but right now in California, they have people saying the opposite.
Contact our friends. Well, you know what? Maybe we get Trump to go back and talk about it to the Californians.
If he could mention it and maybe mention this guy exists and he's kind of a smart dude and he said it doesn't have to be an amendment, just saying, it's like, you know the facts, people know the facts, but we still live in the system where people are wedded to their media bubble. And if their media bubble doesn't say it, it's not true. I've had this argument with people on the left. I've had this argument with people on the right. I would say things like, there are Nazis in Ukraine. Well, I didn't see it on CNN or I didn't see it on Fox. So if it was real news, they would have mentioned it. Therefore, they didn't mention it. Therefore, you're lying, Mark, and you must not know what you're talking about. So they're playing the same game with secession. I didn't mention Texas versus White, or if I did, I said it means automatically you can't secede. I accidentally forget to say that it means consent. And then I accidentally forget to mention it was decided by Abraham Lincoln's boy, his best friend, basically. And then I forget to mention there's top scholars who say it could simple majority vote. I mean, that seems a little bit like someone doesn't want the info to get out. I mean, I can't say that that's conspiracy avenue, but almost like somebody's let's try to trick the people a little bit.
Well, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that goes on. The federal government is afraid of people. It's afraid of the states losing their grip over the states. And empires like that. This is why empires can't they all eventually become extremely paranoid. And this is what we're seeing. And this is what the Soviets saw the same thing. And they got out of it. And, information access in the 50s was nothing like it is today. So we have no excuse. We can wake up. We can be aware. We can act. We are in many ways amazingly liberated. So
we'll leave it there. Any last minute comments? Is there anything I didn't ask you? Anything you wanted to say, or final thoughts you'd like to leave viewers with? One of my favorite questions is to say, you're not you, you're not me, you're somebody listening to this 10 days from now. And they're going to listen and they're going to go, wow, I was really informed. Retired military official, a lot of great questions, a lot of material. I'm struggling to remember it all, but there was this one thing the colonel said. It's 10 days later. I can't get that thought out of my head. What is that one thought, Colonel?
Oh, my gosh.
The pressure's on.
I know, and
Pressure's on.
I totally don't know. But I will say that we live in the most information blessed time of any people that have ever existed on this planet. We have the tools that we need to make every possible dream come true, whether that's of peace, of productivity, of life, of anything. We have what we need. We have more of what we need than any prior generation ever. And we should use it, because we got kids, we got grandkids. Let's use what we have, and not put it onto them. I think, I don't like the idea of waiting and waiting and waiting, and we've waited long enough. And it's time to really assert ourselves as self-governing people who share a idea of liberty, that we as Americans, we're going to watch the football game tonight. Somebody is. And they're going to talk about liberty. They're going to talk about freedom, and they're going to talk about how great Americans are. And all of that is going to be true. So let's embrace that. Let's embrace that and get even bigger. And don't get wrapped around the axle with politics. Let's use politics for what really needs to happen. And that is to increase the amount of liberty in this country. I think that's that may not have been what we talked about. In a sense, it is what we're talking about the whole time. But yeah, we need to increase our liberty. We need to work for that. That is the one thing that's worth doing.
I want to say thank you for your service. Thank you for coming on. And I want to say special thanks to Secession Speakeasy, Grant Dahl. He's the one that got the contact. I appreciate that. We'll leave it there. Would you ever be willing to come back on? Maybe things blow up more in America and I can interview you about it. I'm sure it's going to be a wild ride in the next couple of months.
Oh, absolutely. I love, action, not just talking, but let's see some action. And California is where action happens. It is the land of promise, for no doubt about it. So
thank you. Okay.
Good luck to you.
Leave it there. I'll email you in a couple hours a copy of the show. Thank you for coming on, Colonel. I deeply appreciate your participation.
Okay, it's been great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.